So here is chapter 2 of the Odyssey. The sea god's one-eyed son. One thing there was in plenty, wine. Wine looted from Trojan cellars, slopped in pointed earthenware amphoras, rammed deep into heaps of sand in the stern of each ship. An amphora is a Greek vase. But as for food, there was not a bite left. Odysseus allowed his men to drink a sip of the Trojan wine in the hope that it would raise their spirits, but to his horror, they immediately rolled into helpless drunkenness before slumping asleep on each other's shoulders. A little too strong, he said to his cockerel mascot, and the cockerel shrugged its wings and fluffed out its feathers. The boats drifted for want of rowing. "Land!" shouted the lookout next day. "Look, vines, olive trees, goats. Let's go and load the boats right now." "Let's tread warily and take what we are given," said Odysseus. "I shall take one ship's crew and make contact with the people living here. The rest of you moor by that little island offshore and wait there till I send word that it's safe to join us." So one sole ship sailed up the rocky mainland, past cliffs pitted with caves and planted with olive trees and corn. It is hard to judge size looking inshore from a boat, or they might have wondered at the size of the cavernous cave dwellings or the height of the whiskered corn. Not a boat was moored in the bay, for the art of shipbuilding had not yet reached this remote outreach of the world. There was nobody about. "Bring that amphora of wine," said Odysseus. "We may be able to trade it for food or give it as a gift if we are received graciously." It took 4 strong men to carry the huge stone jar, slung between 2 oars by its looping lug handles. They scrambled ashore and up a path to the nearest of the caves. The smell of cheese and sheep was overpowering as they entered. The wine-bearers set down the wine and propped the oars against the shadowy rear wall. As they did so, they fell over a huge, soft millstone of a cheese. "Look at the size of this, Captain. Come on, let's take it and get out of here. It's food enough to last us as far as Ithaca." "What, steal? When we could wait and be given it?" said Odysseus a little pompously. "The laws of hospitality demand that our host gives us food for our journey." The sinking sun shone in through the cave mouth, and as the night insects began to chirrup, the cliff dwellers came back from pasturing their sheep and cattle inland. The crewmen could hear pebbles dislodged from the pathways tumble into the sea. Then the sheep arrived. Sheep! They were the size of buffalo, fleecy as the bales of flax shipped in 1s and 2s on the great ships of Crete. The sheep were delicate alongside their shepherd, a monstrous landmass of flesh and bone whose knuckles trailed in the dirt and whose mouth was a cave in itself. In the centre of his forehead, rimmed with rheumy lashes, gaped a single massive eye. The Cyclops drove his sheep into the cave, rolled a boulder across the entrance to seal it, then revived the fire smouldering in the centre of the cave. As it flared up, it lit the oval faces of the astounded Greeks. The single eye gleamed as it fixed on each man in turn, and the Cyclops grinned. "Hello, peeplings, aren't you little?" "Indeed, indeed, poor miserable specimens come to admire the famous race of one-eyed giants," said Odysseus, who was not just a hero and a king, but a diplomat. The Cyclops had difficulty in hearing the small piping voice. He cleaned one ear with his finger. 2 eyes, almost repulsive, but I won't let it put me off. Me, Polyphemus, I'll try anything once." Reaching out, he picked up the fattest member of the crew and crammed him into that cavernous mouth. It happened so fast, there was no scream, no shout of protest. When the second man was taken, the Greeks set up a clamour which shook the cliff, racing from side to side of the cave and beating with their fists on the rock. "Sir," cried Odysseus, struggling to keep the terror out of his voice, "where did you learn your manners? From the scum of Troy? Everyone knows that the gods frown on the man who shows unkindness to his guests." "Nobody frowns on Polyphemus," said the Cyclops, tapping his hairy chest. "My father's a god. I can do what I like." He began counting them with an outstretched finger and licking his hairy lips. Are there any more of you outside? Where did you come from? Did you come out of a hole in the ground like ants, or did you fly down from the sky?" Made brave by fury, one man began to say, "We came off the sea in warships with swords and spears aboard, and yes, there are plenty of good men who would be here right now if they had not been wrecked and drowned on the rocks," said Odysseus quickly, to protect the 500 waiting in ignorance on the little island offshore. Better 50 should be lost than 550. are you, skinny one? Said the Cyclops, walking his fingers across the floor toward Odysseus. For a moment he was tempted to throw back his head and declare, I am Odysseus, king of Ithaca, hero of Troy, whose deeds are spoken of by poets, and whose kingdom encompasses Kephallonia and wooded Xanthe. But Odysseus said instead, my family name is Attul, but I was the sorrow of my mother and father's shame. So small am I of stature that my parents called me nobody. What pride could you take in such a prisoner? Now roll back the boulder and let us go, or I won't give you the present I brought with me to your cave. Present? What present? I like presents. Want a present? Give me a present. Give me and I won't eat you. Nobody. Promise, 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 said the Cyclops, dumping his fists on the floor. Very well, since you ask so graciously. Men, fetch out the amphora. Greeks crawled out from every corner of the cave, sobbing with fright. They had no wish to give the Cyclops so much as a smell of their sweat, but they trusted their captain, and they heaved the stone wine jar out of the shadows. Boo, is that all? I've got wine of my own, snarled Polyphemus. Not like this, you haven't. So Polyphemus broke off the neck of the amphora and took a swig. Fair. The flavour settles to the bottom, said Odysseus keenly. The first taste is good, but the last dregs are best. So Polyphemus drank it all, and he had to agree that the more he drank, the happier he grew, until when the amphora was empty, he was so happy that his brains were like melted butter, and his words as scrambled as eggs. Scud present. Nobody like it. Polyphemus sleep now. Also, sheep, sleep now, ha ha ha. Morning time, eat you. Nobody. Eat you? Inquired Odysseus, hoping he had misunderstood. No, shilly, can't eat me, eat you. But you promised, cried Odysseus indignantly. I lied, said Polyphemus with a beaming smile before falling backwards unconscious. For a moment there was silence, then a general rush for the doorway and a great heaving against the boulder. It was futile. The men fell exhausted to their knees and wept openly. We're done for, Captain. It didn't work. Your plan didn't work. My plan has only just begun, said Odysseus from the rear of the cave, where he had stood to watch them struggle with the boulder. Who has a knife with him? Help me work this ore into a point, and quickly. The drink won't keep our hospitable friend asleep for too many hours. With knives and flints off the floor of the cave, they whittled at the rounded end of one of the jars, by which they had carried the wine jar. When it was worked to a point, they laid it in the dying embers of the fire, and when it was glowing hot and ready to burst into flames, they tempered it, hard as metal, by splashing it with milk from the ewe-sheep. Again they laid it in the fire. By the time it was glowing white hot, the darkest, latest hour of the night had begun, and the monstrous Cyclops was beginning to stir. Men who had charged the brass gates of Troy once more stood side by side, the sharpened oar resting on their shoulders like a battering ram. Odysseus was nearest the glowing point. He gave the word to run forward. He aimed the oar. He guided the point into the opening eye of the waking Cyclops. But he and all his men fell back from the noise which followed. Polyphemus arched his back and clawed at them and at the pain in his head. He took hold of the quivering oar and wrenched it out of his tormented face and hurled it. The sheep scattered in terror. The Greeks threw themselves on their faces and prayed to the gods. The Cyclops' screams clamoured in the cave like the clapper in a bell, rattled the cave in its cliff face. Landslides crumbled into the sea below. Other Cyclopses were brought from their beds, men and women all as vast as trees, crashing about in the outer darkness, hurrying to the aid of their neighbour. What is it, Polyphemus? Who's in there with you? The cry came back. Nobody at all has hurt me. Nobody at all is in here. Oh, someone tell my father, nobody at all has blinded me. The Cyclopses peered at each other in the moonlessness. Well, that's all right then. A nightmare, obviously. We're so glad to hear it, Polyphemus. Peace be on your eyelid till morning. And away they went, a little bad-tempered at having been roused up for no purpose. When Polyphemus heard them go, he lapsed into a terrible silence, staring about him at the unutterable darkness of his everlasting night. At last he said, Your plan has failed, nobody. I am not dead, but you and your comrades will never leave this cave alive. Outside, the night sky turned pale with fear. It was morning, but no sunlight creeping in round the massive boulder told Polyphemus that it was daytime, only the bleating of his sheep. Oh, my woolly ones, you want to be out in the daylight, of course you do. Don't I know better than any of you how to long for the sunlight? It's gone. I'll never see it again. I'll never see anything again. Blind, oh you gods, to be blind forever. The sea's blue is nothing but a noise. The grass is green is nothing but wetness underfoot. Oh, my dear, happy, ignorant little sheep, if only you could speak and tell me where those Greeks are hiding, I'd pull them like wishbones. I'd have them die 20 times over in the killing of them. Feeling the contours of the familiar boulder which stoppered up his cave, he put his shoulder to it and rolled it aside. But he sat himself in the very centre of the doorway with his hands spread to either side, so that no loathsome Greek should pass him alive. The sun warmed his back and his sheep pushed forward, bleating. Slowly now, quietly, my little love, said the Cyclops tenderly. It would never do for the villains to get me by clinging to your fleece. As he felt along their backs and along their fleecy sides before he let them pass. Little did he realise that Odysseus had roped the ewes together in threes, and that underneath each centre sheep a man clung on for his life. Soon all the sheep but one had passed Polyphemus. Only the big old ram remained, with Odysseus himself clinging beneath its belly. As it passed the Cyclops, he took hold of its head in his two great hands and wept from his lost eye. Oh, my old mate, my dear old friend and companion, would to the gods you could speak and describe the beauty and wildness of the world. What use am I to you now? Can I milk your ewes, or guide you to the pasture lands? Or I shall have to give you to my worthless neighbours, the scum who left me in agony last night and never came to my aid. Oh, woolly one, I'm sorry. You'll never, never know how sorry I am. At last he let the ram pass by, and Odysseus dropped onto his back on the rough cliff path. He took to his heels and ran after his men, gathered by now on the beach below. They were wrestling the sheep into their fast black ship, food for the voyage. They pushed off, they bent across their oars. The sea rose white beneath the prow. Their course lay past the cliff, pitted with caves, right below the cave mouth where Polyphemus sat feeling about for his enemies. The memory of his two dead companions galled Odysseus. He could not unfix his eyes from the huge hairy back of the weeping Cyclops. All at once he got to his feet and roared, I am Odysseus, Polyphemus. I am Odysseus, hero of Troy, and my kingdom encompasses Ithaca, Cephalonia, and wooded Xanthe. It was I who blinded you, and the poets will one day praise me for it in songs of 60 verses. The men at their oars stared at him in disbelief. Even his mascot, his own cockerel, pecked him in the arm, but Odysseus was unrepentant. What harm can it do, he blared. There's no one but a blind Cyclops to hear me. Ha ha ha. Polyphemus heard the taunt and rose to his knees, then to his feet. He cocked his ear towards the sound of Odysseus's voice. He picked up the boulder from the opening of his cave and raised it over his head. Before he let it go, he raised his blinded face to the heat of the sun and bawled, Father, you god of the oceans, Poseidon, god of the sea, hear my curse. See what Odysseus, king of Ithaca, has done to your son. Hate him with all the heat of the earth's core as I do. Hate him with all the unforgivingness of the earth's icy peaks as I do. Curse him as I curse him. Avenge him, for I am powerless to be avenged. And he hurled the boulder. It hit the water a fraction behind the stern post, and the wave it raised lifted the boat like a hand and thrust it forward, gouging a furrow through the sea. Headlong they hit the little offshore island. Keel long the boat split, spilling the rowers onto the silver shingle. Odysseus, as he rolled clear, laughed out loud and kicked his feet in the air. So much for the curse of a Cyclops, he snorted as his crew of 500 and more gathered round him, slaughtering the captured sheep. But of those who had escaped from the cave, not one laughed and not one congratulated him. 2 of their comrades were dead, eaten by the Cyclops, and Polyphemus had cursed them. Odysseus scowled and lay on his back, looking up at the sunny morning sky. Poseidon, did he say? Whispered a voice over his heart. Are we to be cursed by Poseidon, the god of the sea? And somewhere, in the ocean's well, the cries of Polyphemus set the electric rays trembling and the jaws of clams agape. Polyphemus is blinded, they cried. A curse on Odysseus and on all his men.